I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and you've been listening to a CBS News special report. San Diego law enforcement just provided an update on the shooting at an Islamic center. At least 3 victims are dead. 2 suspected shooters are also dead. We're told all children who were inside, though, are confirmed safe. We want to go straight to CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. She is also the former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security. And Sam, we heard from law enforcement officials there on the ground, as well as from the FBI, that they're investigating this as a hate crime. Where does this investigation go from here?
Well, at this point, Nicole, we should assume that the subjects are going to be identified as quickly as possible. And certainly that there will be warrants garnered also as quickly as possible to understand the subjects' patterns of behavior leading up to this incident, whom they were in contact with. There will be ballistic and forensic evidence that is collected to ascertain where the firearms were purchased, as well as ultimately what the motivation was that led these 2 individuals to allegedly go and shoot at the Islamic Center. Certainly, of course, their social media profiles will be reviewed to see if there's any nexus to, for example, foreign terrorism or other individuals in the United States. But I do want to highlight one thing. In my experience as Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, we work tirelessly with faith-based institutions all across the country, as well as federal, state, and local law enforcement partners to ensure that if an incident like this did play out, that the response time was as quick as it possibly could be. And we understand that the response time in this case was 4 minutes. Certainly 4 very long minutes for those that were implicated, but 4 minutes. So it does appear that that law enforcement response was quite quick. And what we don't know yet, as well, is whether there were security guards and other physical hardening mechanisms at the Islamic Center that prevented this horrific incident from being even worse. So, a lot of unanswered questions, but the investigation is just beginning. We may not know the subjects' identities for some period of time. So, we need to be patient in that respect to wait to hear more details.
And I want to also bring into the conversation now CBS News senior coordinator, producer for crime and public safety, Anna Schechter, who joins us now. And I know you were listening to that press conference a short time ago. What stood out to you?
Well, the fact that there are 2 suspects, both deceased. I've seen a photo of them next to their vehicle, and they're teenagers. So very young suspects. And it appears preliminarily, my sources are telling me, it appears that they took their own lives. This was a very fluid situation where you had 911 calls coming in at 11:43 a.m. from the mosque. And then at the same time, the shooters had left. So calls coming in from a few blocks away. And we learned that the suspects had fired at someone doing work in a yard who thankfully wasn't hit. So what strikes me is just how much worse this could have been. We've heard from eyewitnesses who heard upwards of 30 shots. It's unclear if all of those were fired by the suspects or if a security guard who we know was hit at one point also fired shots, but lots of gunfire in a very short amount of time, Nicole.
And I want to turn back to you, Sam. You know, we also heard from the FBI official who was there on the ground. Even though, again, the local police chief says he believes this is a hate crime, at the same time, this FBI official said that they are still asking for patience to determine a motive. So, kind of, how do you square those two things? He also asked the public for information. So, what does that tell you about how law enforcement officials are going about this?
Well, the FBI agent who briefed the public indicated that they're treating this as a hate crime investigation until it isn't, based on the fact that this incident, this horrific incident, took place at a very large mosque as well. The mosque, as our viewers may not know, also houses the school, other Islamic cultural activities, and more. A hate crime is really a crime that is motivated by an offender's bias against a victim or victims' actual or perceived affiliation with certain protected categories like religion, like sex, and other matters. It may be the case that there was some other motivation in play here. It could be a personal grievance, but because this terrific incident did occur at this mosque, they're treating it as a hate crime at this time until new evidence surfaces that could discount that. But what that means in practice is that there are specialized agents within the FBI that will be deploying to more than likely lead this investigation in coordination with state and local partners. So we should assume that this will be an investigation with law enforcement officials from all levels of government. At some point, intelligence professionals may get looped in as well, but it will be a multi-layered campaign with various a multi-layered investigation with various layers of law enforcement jurisdictions involved.
And Anna, I want to turn back to you. I know you said this situation could be much worse. And, again, certainly good news that no children were harmed in this incident. But talk to me about security and whether or not you expect security could be tightened at institutions like this going forward.
Well, they had already been tightened. Just a couple of months ago, you had the largest temple in Michigan attacked. And it was filled with children who were at an early childhood education program. Thankfully, they all got out safe as well. Similar outcome to this, where you had school children who thankfully got out. What I read from this, knowing that a security guard was hit, is that these institutions have amped up their security. You had a security guard who was trained, who appeared to address the threat because he was hit, possibly killed, according to my sources. So what I'm seeing is security teams in touch with local law enforcement regularly because they know the threat is so high. We have been in a heightened threat environment for more than 2 years, almost 3 years. And now, since the onslaught of the latest war with Iran in late February, when that kicked off, counterterror teams are on even higher alert because the threat is so significant to all houses of worship of all religions. And you see an increased physical presence, and that might have led to this outcome that could have been so much worse. We lost 3 people tragically, but no children were killed. It could have been so much worse, as you said, Nicole.
All right, Anna Schechter and Sam Vinograd, we want to thank you so much for joining us, and certainly we'll come back to you if developments warrant. Turning now to politics, President Trump is facing a critical test this week with primaries in 6 states, some of which could show his influence on the party he leads. Democrats hope that voters will express their displeasure with the president and his policies in the voting booth. On Tuesday night, we'll see if that's the case. But for now, a new CBS News poll shows the president's numbers are heading in the wrong direction on a number of key issues. The president's job approval stands at just 37%. It is the lowest since 2003. As for how Trump's policies impact the economy in the short term, 13% say they are making it better, while 65% say they are making it worse. And on the war with Iran, when asked who has the advantage, 38% say the U.S. does, 21% say it's Iran, and 41% says neither. To break down more of these numbers and preview the expected headlines in tomorrow's primaries, we turn to CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, walk us through how Americans view the state of the economy. What were the key takeaways here?
Hey there, Nicole. I want to start with this because feelings are always so important and attached to finances. Concerned is a big word they use. Stressed is a big word they use. Uncertain is another. But we also saw the number who feel that they're financially secure drop to under a majority from a year ago. So that's what underpins a lot of the numbers that you read there at the top. And of course, underpinning all of that really stands out has been gas prices. We saw an increase in the number who said those gas prices right now for them are financially difficult or they're a hardship. And that in turn goes towards something you also said at the top about the war, which is, do people feel like they have a clear understanding of what's going on specifically with the situation in the Strait of Hormuz? 7 in 10 said they do not. And that is part of that uncertainty that goes through all those economy feelings, Nicole.
Yeah, and I was going to say, how does that play more specifically into the war with Iran? How much of that is weighing into people's views on the economy? Are they tied together or seen as separate issues?
Well, take a look at this. Majority say they feel that the president's economic policies in general are making them financially worse off. That's one of the reasons that they've seen his approval for handling inflation go down now to its lowest level of the term. But also this, since we're talking politics and we're about to talk midterms, let me show you this among Republicans. Yes, they still strongly support the president on a number of things, but there's been a decline in the number of Republicans who say they approve of his handling of inflation. What that tells you is gas prices cut across party lines, Nicole.
And so more specifically, what are you going to be watching for ahead of tomorrow night's primaries?
So we've got a number of storylines. One is, let's say, on the president, his influence. When we get to stories like Kentucky, Thomas Massie in his primary, of course, the president's endorsed his challenger. We're going to be watching that. We've seen a string, notably in Louisiana just this weekend, of folks that the president does not endorse going down. That's Bill Cassidy. And then, you know, the road to the House control probably runs at least partly through Pennsylvania this year. We're going to have a number of competitive House districts all along the Delaware River. And we're going to be watching all of those in and around Pennsylvania and those that area there. That's going to be so important, setting up a lot of what you and I and everyone are going to watch through November, Nicole.
All right, we will be watching it together. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. Thanks. I want to turn now to CBS News' Aaron Navarro. He joins me now from Lexington, Kentucky, where he is following Congressman Thomas Massie's primary race. And Aaron, I spoke with Congressman Massie just last week, and he told me this is going to be a very close race. What is your sense on the ground?
Well, in an event earlier today, he acknowledged that while the president's endorsement to his challenger, Ed Gowrine, gives him a 20-point boost in the polls, according to Massie's calculations, it's the outside spending, over $30 million at this point, that he believes has made this race competitive. But in his final argument to voters, he really stuck by the times that he has voted against President Trump when it comes to spending for foreign countries or when it comes to the war in Iran. He said and argued that he is the same congressman that these voters in the 4th District of Kentucky voted into Congress in 2012 and said that he has remained principled when it comes to matters of government spending and foreign wars.
Over the weekend, Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy lost his primary after going against the president, most notably by voting to convict him during his second impeachment trial. Obviously, we know the dynamics are a bit different with Congressman Massie, but could he potentially meet the same fate despite some of those arguments you just made?
It's certainly possible. From voters, supporters of Massie that I talked to, they really felt that this was a 50-50 race at this point. But Massie voiced a lot of confidence in knowing the district, particularly when it comes to agriculture. He made sure to be talking about the times that he has taken a stand in Congress to get some of the funding that is needed for farmers in this northern Kentucky district. And he also believes that the support from pro-life, pro-gun groups here in Kentucky's 4th District will help get him over the hump. Take a listen to what he said on ABC this past Sunday.
You say the president is desperate, but he's got a pretty good record of defeating people he wants to target in Republican primaries. We saw Bill Cassidy yesterday. We saw what happened in Indiana. How are you going to be able to overcome the president's opposition?
Well, I have the endorsement of the Right to Life organizations, the gun organizations. I had 4 members of Congress come here yesterday and campaign with me. So my situation is a little bit different. Plus, I've had millions of dollars come in from the grassroots, tens of thousands of donors to my website.
Now, President Trump, for his part, has really done a lot to post about Massie. And earlier this afternoon, he sent his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to campaign with Massie's challenger, Ed Gowrine.
Yeah, that's right. Pretty unusual there, too. Aaron Navarro, thank you so much. Well, here to preview Georgia's primary day is Adam Beam. He is the deputy politics editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So great to have you with us, Adam. I want to start with the Senate and gubernatorial contest on the GOP side. Are these races a referendum on outgoing Governor Brian Kemp?
Well, I think Republican challenger Derek Dooley wants to make it that way. Derek Dooley is a former football coach. He's a political newcomer, never run for public office before, and even prior to 2020, had hardly ever really voted before. And Derek Dooley is really basing his entire campaign on an endorsement from Governor Brian Kemp. Governor Kemp remains one of the most popular Republican officials in the state. But so far, that popularity has not really transferred to Derek Dooley. There's 3 candidates in this race on the Republican side. 2 of them are sitting members of Congress. President Trump has stayed out of the race. And so far, none of these 3 candidates have been able to break through.
And which means maybe a runoff might be likely. So what potentially could the outcome of the Senate GOP primary mean for Democratic incumbent Jon Ossoff?
Well, I think so far, Senator Ossoff is just sitting back and enjoying all the mudslinging that's happening between these 3 candidates. He hasn't really had to do anything. They haven't really been able to hit him effectively because they've been so busy fighting among themselves. As I think it's one of the things that's making Republicans here really nervous. They feel like Senator Ossoff is the most vulnerable Democrat on the map. He's the only incumbent Democratic senator who's running for re-election in the state that President Trump won in 2024. They feel like this should be an easy pickup opportunity for them, and yet they feel kind of out of position because of the way this primary has played out so far.
And then walk us through the gubernatorial contest, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, because there's a pretty crowded field on both sides of the aisle here.
Absolutely. You would think the Senate contest here would kind of dominate everything, but it's really been the race for governor that's got everybody's attention. On the Republican side, you have Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Everybody thought that the nomination was his to lose. He got an endorsement from President Trump very early on in the process, but then earlier this year, a billionaire healthcare executive by the name of Rick Jackson jumped in the race. He spent about $83 million of his own money so far, and he's really upended this contest. It's really become a 2-person race between Jackson and Jones. President Trump today has reiterated his support for Lieutenant Governor Jones, but the polling shows it's a really neck-and-neck contest despite that. Now, on the Democratic side, you still have no consensus. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has been the consistent leader in the polls from the outset, but she's not really been able to break away. There's a large, sizable group of voters who are undecided. They're trying to choose between a number of alternatives, including former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who was a Republican who most famously supported the state's abortion restrictions. He's now switched parties. He says he's become dismayed by Trump's policies and the MAGA movement. He's trying to get some attention there. And then you have a state senator, Jason Estevez, former state senator, and a former DeKalb County chief executive who are also trying to carve lanes in this primary.
Well, a lot to keep track of, but we know you'll be on top of it and probably working late into the night tomorrow, hopefully with some pizza. So Adam Bean, we thank you so much for being with us. And a quick programming note for us. Major Garrett will host special coverage of tomorrow's primaries right here on CBS News 24/7, starting at 8 p.m. President Trump posted on social media this afternoon that the U.S. will not go through with attacks on Iran that were scheduled for tomorrow. He went on to say allies in the Middle East asked him not to. Joining us now to break this down is CBS News political reporter Zach Hudak. And Zach, I guess just give us a little bit more of the backstory of why the president's now standing down on this so-called scheduled attack.
Nicole, in a lot of ways, this is a story that we've heard before over the past few months with the Iran war. We have repeatedly seen the president use kind of a carrot and stick maneuver where he threatens that major attacks, potentially total annihilation, are coming if there is not progress made. And then he announces last minute, right before said attacks, that there are serious talks happening. And then a week or so goes by, and we get statements from the Iranians that progress is not being made, and the president issues yet another ultimatum or another threat. So this seems in a lot of ways like a loop that the administration is stuck in. And I want to emphasize that they're in a particularly tough position here, being in a midterm year. They really need to find a way to show that they're getting some sort of victory out of Iran. So far, the result has been that the strait has been largely closed or much more difficult to navigate. That's brought up prices. And at a minimum, they need to show Iran, as a result of this, is not going to be pursuing a nuclear weapon. And frankly, they're not there yet.
Yeah, well, to your point, how do they get out of this? I mean, what is the administration saying with respect to the overall state of the war and negotiations?
They continue to try various efforts. We've had several summits happen in Pakistan. The Pakistanis have been particularly helpful for the administration in building trust throughout these negotiations. That being said, it's not clear how they get out of it. With this current system, it seems like we're very much stuck in this cycle. I don't know at what point the president's threats stop meaning as much to the Iranians because he has so many times issued them and then taken them away.
I want to turn to another topic, just to switch gears for a second. The president has settled a lawsuit against the IRS. What more can you tell us about the terms?
Nicole, this was a lawsuit that involved, in 2020, a independent contractor for the IRS leaking the president's and his son's tax returns. So a major violation of law to do that. He sued the federal government as a result of that, and this has resulted in a settlement. He had requested $10 billion, but what the settlement does is it creates a $1.7 billion fund that they're calling an anti-weaponization fund that would include money that would go to folks who the administration feels the Biden administration weaponized the government against. Those could be people as broad as folks who were prosecuted for January 6 incidents. It also will allow that fund to issue formal apologies. So this is an avenue for the administration to, in some ways, rewrite what is kind of the official history for a lot of these folks who've been convicted of crimes. And now if they get an official apology from the federal government, that will really change the way they're perceived, I would think, in the history books.
Well, Zach Hudak, keeping track of it all, thank you so much for being with us. As President Trump publicly weighs taking military action in Cuba, the country's president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, is warning that doing so would create a, quote, bloodbath. In an exclusive, Axios reports that Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and is discussing using them to potentially attack the Guantanamo Bay U.S. detention center and possibly even parts of the U.S. mainland. White House correspondent for Axios, Mark Caputo, joins me now to discuss his new reporting and walk us through what you've learned, Mark.
Well, you sort of set it up pretty well. Is after the toppling of Maduro in Venezuela, Venezuelan intelligence began telling the United States that around mid-2023, Cuba had begun acquiring drones and had as many as 300, which surprised the United States. And recently, according to the intelligence officials we spoke to, there were intercepts of chatter, of discussions in Cuban military circles of not only buying more drones from Russia, but also discussing possibly attacking these targets. Now, we are told that there's no imminent threat from Cuba, that Cuba was talking about launching these attacks in case hostilities erupted, military hostilities. But nevertheless, the United States, the Trump administration, doesn't like the idea that there's a hostile regime, one that is classified as a state sponsor of terror, one that has a number of Iranian military advisors, as well as Russian military advisors or military personnel, and Chinese ones as well, who are so close to the United States, who have this drone technology, because we've seen in Iran and we've seen in Ukraine what the capabilities of drone technology can be when a smaller force uses it against a larger force.
And is there anything that U.S. officials are doing protectively with respect to Guantanamo Bay or just this potential threat, even if it's not imminent, as you say?
I'm not aware of any, but I think it's safe to say that since it's something that they're discussing, they are taking those actions. One of the things to remember is that some of the effectiveness of Iran's counterstrikes against the United States took place in Kuwait. There are 6 soldiers, 6 military personnel died there, and that was probably in a drone strike. And one of the things that drones enable smaller militaries to do is to wage asymmetric warfare against larger military forces. There's an interesting aspect of this that we were told by U.S. intelligence, which is that about 5,000 Cuban soldiers had been sort of drafted into Russia's war against Ukraine. And in the process of fighting for Russia and seeing the effectiveness of the Ukrainian drone terror techniques and technology, they came back to Cuba and said, hey, this stuff works. And that sort of helped whet the appetite of the Cuban military officials. I think one of the reasons what you cited a second ago is being said from Diaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, that there could be a bloodbath, but we're not being aggressive about this, is that unlike Iran, the Cubans do not have the military capability to wage war in any sort of significant way. They don't have the number of drones that could be used against the United States in an effective way. And so were they to attack, which again, there's no signs that they would, the United States would probably make very quick work of the Cuban military.
And then just briefly, do we know if anything came of CIA Director John Ratcliffe's visit with Havana officials last week?
No, we do know, or we are told, that he did raise the drone issue and related matters to the Cubans. And there's essentially two schools of thought as to why the United States government is doing that. Number one, it's telling the Cuban officials, hey, we're on to you, we can spy on you, we know what you're doing, we know what your capabilities are, so beware. Or the other one is that this is just a pretext for an invasion. I'm not getting the second one as much of an option, but nevertheless, it's one that could be on the table.
All right, Mark Caputo, thank you so much for your reporting. Hope to have you back on.
Thank you.
And still to come on the Takeout, Los Angeles mayoral candidate Nithya Raman joins the show, how she views the state of her campaign against Mayor Karen Bass, and reality star Spencer Pratt. Plus, an American doctor working in the Congo tests positive for Ebola, what we know about the state of the outbreak. Also, Elon Musk loses his lawsuit against OpenAI. Our Jolene Kent breaks down why the jury rejected the suit and what this could mean for the future of AI. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. A California jury unanimously dismissed Elon Musk's lawsuit against OpenAI and Sam Altman. They found Musk waited too long to bring the suit, which alleged Sam Altman unlawfully enriched himself in the company that Musk helped create. Musk co-founded the company and invested $38 million in its early years. CBS News senior business and tech correspondent Jolene Kent closely followed this case and joins me now. Jolene, walk us through how this trial played out and how it ultimately culminated in today's verdict.
Well, it was a blockbuster trial that certainly took the attention of Silicon Valley and brought it inside a federal courtroom in Oakland, California. But what happened today is there was less than 2 hours of deliberation, and then the jury unanimously delivered a verdict that they recommended to the judge, which she accepted, that the case be tossed out because Elon Musk did not file his lawsuit in time. It's a 3-year statute of limitation, and they said that they believe that Musk knew about his allegations before those 3 years expired. And as a result, OpenAI is not liable for any of the claims that Elon Musk was bringing in court. But this was a very quick decision. And as a result, all of the different communications, the interesting things that we learned within the case were not really discussed or analyzed or brought to a verdict due to the statute of limitation. And I want to read to you Elon Musk tweeting today after his own legal team says they do plan to appeal this. He said the judge and jury never actually ruled on the merits of the case, just on a calendar technicality. Now, in response to that, the OpenAI team said that what Elon Musk calls a calendar technicality is what they believe to be a fundamental part of the case, that if he really was so concerned about this, why didn't he file his lawsuit sooner? They allege it's because he has sour grapes about OpenAI becoming a success, a competitor. And keep in mind that OpenAI is slated to go public later this year, along with xAI, Elon Musk's company. So OpenAI, that legal team, saying that they were celebrating the case today and also believing that if this was not a sour competitor, so to speak, this lawsuit would have been filed earlier by Musk himself.
All right, Jolene Kent, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Now to an update on the Ebola outbreak in the Congo. An American doctor working there has tested positive for the disease. According to the World Health Organization, there have been 250 suspected cases and 80 suspected Ebola-related deaths. I want to turn now to CBS News medical correspondent, Dr. Celine Gounder. She is an infectious disease specialist who spent time in Guinea as an Ebola aid worker during the West African epidemic. Dr. Gounder, thanks for being with us. And first off, what do you make of what we are hearing about this American doctor, and what can potentially be done as far as a course of treatment?
So this doctor is a surgeon, and so that would imply that he has very significant exposure to bodily fluids. We also know that there is a shortage of personal protective equipment on the ground in the DRC for a whole host of reasons. Part of this is because USAID was dismantled. USAID was providing logistics and supply chain support. In addition, you have armed militia all throughout the area, which makes it also very difficult to get supplies. So we know that they've been dealing with a shortage of PPE. Could that have contributed to the risk of infection? Possibly, we don't know. And in terms of the doctor's clinical status, we don't have a lot of detail yet. We only know that he's symptomatic. This has been confirmed to be Ebola. There are two other physicians involved, his wife, who's an obstetrician gynecologist, and one other doctor. Those are the other two are considered also high risk exposures. And then we believe that the others who are being evacuated are the four children of the surgeon and OBGYN. So those are your seven. They are being medevac to Germany. We do not know if that will be a U.S. military facility or some other facility in Germany. And as for medical treatment, the treatment for Bundibiju, this particular species of Ebola, we don't have specific treatments. It's really about providing supportive care. IV fluids are actually a very big part of that.
Yeah, and just to dive deeper in terms of that assessment that you laid out very well and some of the challenges that you articulated, I guess ultimately, what does this mean for the potential spread of this outbreak? Is this something that can be contained, or is it just simply managing it at this point?
I think we can expect a very large epidemic in this part of the world with occasional um, exportations outside the region.
All right, Dr. Celine Gounder, thank you so much. We want to move now to Los Angeles, where more than a dozen candidates are challenging Mayor Karen Bass in next month's primary. While Bass is sitting with a lead in most polls, two candidates, Spencer Pratt and Nithya Raman, have gained ground in recent months. Earlier, I spoke with Raman about her race and her candidacy. Here's more of our conversation. You just got into the race earlier this year, and some polls show you trailing incumbent Mayor Karen Bass as well as reality star Spencer Pratt. What are you doing between now and the June primary to close the gap?
You know, LA has a top two primary system, and incumbents usually get into the runoff, which is what the polling is showing us here. What I'm trying to do is tell people about the state of the race. Spencer Pratt and I are neck and neck right now, and one of us will be in the runoff and will be on the ballot in November. And that race for the second spot comes down to me, who has a progressive vision for an affordable Los Angeles, or a MAGA Republican who's a conspiracy theorist who has never held public office and has never shared any plans for how he's actually going to implement the change that he talks about. To me, that's the choice that's facing Los Angeles on June 2nd, and every vote is going to matter. That's the message that we're getting out to voters right now, and that is the message that is taking hold among many of the people that we're talking to.
Mayor Bass recently described Spencer Pratt's campaign as, quote, tapping into a general sense of anger that people have. Do you agree with that assessment?
I believe that there is a real sense of frustration in Los Angeles around the state of the city. That's what propelled me to get into the race. And I feel like if you don't address that frustration with real actions, if you don't demonstrate real change on the ground in the things that are driving that frustration, the incredibly high cost of living here in this city, the homelessness crisis, which continues roiling our streets every single day, if you don't demonstrate progress, people will turn to people like Spencer Pratt, who are giving voice to that frustration, but who are not promising anything like real solutions. Anyone who tells you that homelessness can be fixed with a tweet is simply not being honest with you. And I want voters to be able to channel their frustrations into real change, change that I've demonstrated in my district.
You were once a key ally of the mayor, though. You even backed her reelection. So, what changed for you, and do you believe your candidacy could split the vote and force a runoff?
You know, the mayor's polling was very low even before I got into the race. And there was a very, very high likelihood of a runoff no matter what. And there were a number of candidates who had challenged our incumbent mayor. What I'm trying to offer is a choice between a very broken status quo that I think has failed a lot of Angelenos. People look into our city and they see a city that is harder to live in than it was before Mayor Bass took office. They see a city which is not meeting the moment. It's not meeting the issues that they're facing with urgency or accountability or results. And what I'm trying to show with my candidacy is that there is an alternative between our broken status quo and a MAGA Republican who is making unjustified promises to Angelenos, that we can have a path forward that promises a real solution to the very real challenges that Angelenos are facing. And that's really the message that I'm sharing with voters.
In the mayoral debate this month, you accused Bass and Pratt of working together against you. Do you still believe that? I mean, they both have denied that.
You know, I think that the political machine, which is supporting Mayor Bass in her reelection, is spending a lot of money to ensure that I don't get into the runoff, because I think they see me as a very real threat to the status quo, to what is already in place right now. And so, yes, I do believe that people are trying to ensure that I don't make it into the runoff. But for me, as someone who cares about Los Angeles, who has watched politics play out at the national level in really, I think, corrosive ways, I don't want that for the next 5 months in our general election. I want to make sure that we're having a real debate about how we address the very real issues that are facing us. I have plans for addressing our cost of living crisis driven by our extraordinary cost of housing. I have a real agenda for addressing homelessness with accountability and urgency and building on the results that I've had in my own district. That's the debate that I want to be having. That's the debate that Angelenos deserve.
All right. Councilwoman Nithya Raman, we thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And coming up, our CBS News Radio Flashback brings us Walter Cronkite on the Geneva Summit more than 70 years ago. You're watching The Takeout. Our CBS radio clip of fame. There is no precise moment when globalization began, but if you're looking for a moment very near the start, what you are about to hear is it. The year is 1955, and the world is a decade removed from the Allied victory in World War II, a monstrous conflict of never-before-seen carnage and slaughter. To avoid a third world war, the great powers tried something new, a meeting to explore trade relations, peace talks, and arms control. The city, Geneva. The players, America, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The sense of global anticipation, very high.
CBS Radio presents Crossroads at Geneva, a summary of the world's hopes and expectations as recorded on the eve of the Big Four conference, with reports from Geneva, Paris, London, and Washington. We begin in New York with CBS correspondent Walter Cronkite.
It is now late afternoon in Geneva, Switzerland. The heads of the four most powerful nations on earth are there, waiting for tomorrow. When it comes, they will sit down to talk. What they say to each other may determine, for good or ill, the fate of all of us in the foreseeable future. But there is no way of predicting the outcome. We can only examine the attitudes and intentions that have gone into it, and of these we don't know very much. From the men at the top, we have heard only as much as they cared to reveal in the not very explicit language of diplomacy. President Eisenhower spoke for the United States just before he boarded his plane.
We shall be conciliatory because our country seeks no conquests, no property of others. We shall be tolerant because this nation does not seek to impose our way of life upon others. We shall be firm in the consciousness of your spiritual and material strength and your defense of the right. But we shall extend the hand of friendship to all who will grasp it honestly and concede to us the same rights, the same understanding, the same freedom that we accord to them.
The Russians have said much less, except to deny that they will be negotiating from a position of weakness. Foreign Minister Molotov has made only one reference to the Geneva conference in recent weeks.
Мне кажется, вы хорошо знаете о том, что Советский Союз стоит за воссоединение Германии.
As for the Geneva Conference, the Soviet Union is in favor of the unification of Germany. It stands to reason that we're in favor of that unification on a peaceful and democratic basis.
What that basis would be, he did not say. Prime Minister Eden of Great Britain has been more specific.
We are not prepared to break up NATO. We will not be parted from the United States of America. We will work for the unification of Germany. Subject to these principles, our position is negotiable. I will tell you what I hope for. Our first aim will be to allay mistrust on either side.
Now, it's worth pointing out that France had deep and immediate concerns. You will hear references to Indochina and North Africa, which is shorthand for Vietnam and Algeria, places where French colonial control was already under pressure and soon to crack.
Collectively, the French have a definite attitude toward this meeting at the summit. And for an analysis of what that is, we'll call in CBS Paris correspondent Blair Clark, who is now in Geneva.
Probably more than any of the other three powers, France hopes some sort of relaxation in world tensions will come out of this conference. France has perhaps felt more than its allies the strain of the Cold War, the necessity to mount important forces in Europe while she is struggling to maintain her positions overseas. I need only cite Indochina and now North Africa. If it were possible, as a result of this meeting or its successors, to ease up a bit, there would be vast relief in a France that is still not fully recovered from the wars of the past. Therefore, hopes are high in France for the success of this meeting at the summit. But France has fears that go right along with her hopes. The main fear is about Germany, the ancient enemy now become an ally.
In the end, Geneva did not produce breakthroughs, but did create something meaningful, channels of dialogue and a default inclination to try diplomacy before war. That does it for the Takeout today. I'm Nicole Killian in for Major Garrett. The Daily Report is coming up next.